All right, what's up guys, my name is Will Alexander, and today I'm going to give you my review of the Bataleon Whatever. For reference, I'm 6'6" and about 200 pounds, and I'm riding on the 162 wide. The 162 wide is about as wide of a board as you'll get from Bataleon, except for when you get up into the 167 Goliath. So these boards are almost the exact same width in terms of like waist width and tip tail width. Obviously, lengthwise very different, so you're going to get a shorter radius, still normal radius for a board like this. It's not going to be that weird kind of volume shifted shorter with a really tight turning radius like you could get on the like Twin Pig or the Spring Break Palatwin. Overall, board is pretty light on flex. I'm going to give you guys all the stats here for all of the size ranges and all that kinds of stuff. This board is actually pretty normal, like in terms of everything about like how it flexes, how it pops, everything according to the spec sheets is right on par. The thing that really sets this board apart from everything else is the 3BT, and most of the pros and cons that I've found from riding this board are mostly out of that 3BT. Also, this is the 21-22 model. The 22-23 model is the exact same in terms of specs, build, everything else. The only thing that changes is the top sheet color and the base color. On the base, I got the white with the black lettering, which really kind of goes to show the extruded base on this. This is one of the easiest boards I've gotten to be dirtied. Partially you can see it is white, but on my Spring Break Palatwin it also has a white base. Never got nearly this dirty. That might be the difference between that centered and this extruded base. But yeah, this thing gets dirty really, really quickly. Obviously, the extruded is supposedly better and easier to fix with P-Tex and a like candlestick, but I've fixed centered boards with that as well and had no issues. So the biggest thing that sets this board apart from the normal boards out in the market is the 3BT. But you're starting to see a little bit more 3BT out in the industry thanks to Nidecker because of their ownership of a bunch of different rider-owned brands, keeping them rider-owned. But the 3BT is really where most of the pros and cons of this board come into. On the pros side, honestly, the 3BT, when it comes to just riding around the mountain and just cruising, is so nice. Going from edge to edge feels completely effortless, and there's no, it takes little to no, yeah, so the 3BT is really where you get all of the pros and cons. The 3BT is really where all of my pros and cons of this board come in. Across the board, you'll get pros in certain areas, and there'll be a con in the exact same thing in a different area. So turning, going edge to edge, this thing's amazing. So when you're just cruising going down the mountain, going from heel side to toe side, feels like you're not putting any effort in. Super easy. It's amazing. With that though, I'm really tall, so I don't put too much angle on my board. Is that occasionally when I'm going into turns, I'll get a little bit of what feels like kind of side slipping when I would rather be on edge. The same thing kind of goes for like your edge control. You kind of lose a little bit of edge control with 3BT on really icy situations. I was up at Mount Bachelor this winter. It was a super cold, icy day. I think it had rained the night before, froze over, and you really only get edge control between about here, which is a little bit past your bindings and under. But on icy conditions, you really want to have as much edge as you can biting into whatever ice or snow you can get into. With the 3BT on this, there was definitely times where I felt like I didn't have enough control because there wasn't enough weight over the kind of center of my board to dig into that icy conditions. One of those times where I wish I'd had a kind of normal board that was completely flat that would had a little bit more edge contact. The other thing with 3BT that comes across that's like kind of a pro-con situation at the same time is buttering and landing. So when you're kind of buttering and doing tricks, the catch-free portion of the 3BT is really nice mentally because you're really not worried about it as much. But because your edges are lifted up, if you're ever doing a butter and you really want to kind of pop off or edge into it, you don't have that control because the board is obviously lifted, and that edge that would normally kind of probably be in the snow like this is now almost flat and not catching. It kind of falls when you're trying to put a little bit more edge into something and have a little bit more control, like, hey, if I want to butter in and then keep and maintain a line going towards something. This one falls a little bit short. It gets a little wobbly sometimes, where on a regular board you wouldn't necessarily get that. But at the same time, if you ever come up on a butter or a spin a little bit short on your rotation, the 3BT and the 3D edges on this definitely help it to smooth out that landing, where if you had a board that had a full non-3D edge, you might have a little bit more catch and you might grab on that edge a little bit more, where on this board you wouldn't have that. Same thing kind of goes for landings on jumps, is that you land perfectly flat. Sometimes you can kind of feel a little bit of wobble, or if you're coming off of a spin, there'd be times where I would land and where you would under a normal board have a little bit more of a kind of straight line drive coming out of your edge. This board would tend to wash out a little bit if you're standing a little bit upright. But yeah, for me being tall, that happens more often than not, just because for me to lean all the way over and get my weight over the edge is a long distance and basically means I'm already carving. So the other thing where 3BT I feel like falls short, and it really just comes down to edge control, because I've been riding for about 20 years now and been on regular boards the entire time with nothing 3D, is coming to pop. If you're directly down the middle of the board, you can get good pop for sure. If you're kind of on edge, it'll be there. But the biggest issue that I have found was going over rollers. So one of the biggest things that I found as a con about the 3BT, which really comes back to the edge control, is popping. So one of my go-tos on jumps is doing a front three. In that, you're kind of on your heels slightly, but not usually with a huge angle. I'm not going off of huge jumps, and even then if you are, you're not going off of it with a huge angle of a carve going heel side. When you go to pop, and especially off of smaller jumps, you're kind of popping more off your tail rather than kind of off both legs and spinning around, is that because this edge isn't fully activated into the ground, your area of kind of acceleration off the lip kind of gets washed out in here. And so sometimes you would lose a little bit of pop and lose a little bit of spin because you didn't have that extra little kick of your tail hitting off the lip. You couldn't really load it up, is really what it comes down to. And then the other thing came down to doing rollers. But generally when you're popping off rollers, you're not really carving into them, so you're not going to be super on edge. But the fact that when you're loading it up for a traditional ollie, there isn't any edge control. When I do flat ground ollies, I will generally load up my tail, but everything kind of slightly over my toes, which is slightly over my toe edge. And that allows me to actually get the pop and have that edge control that I really want through the entire thing. On this board, it's not really possible. Slightly on your toes puts you in this little pocket right here, right where you can see the 3BT kind of bend in this board. And when that happens and you load up and put all your weight in this, it's basically just putting it right in this spot that has no contact and there's no like control whatsoever. And you get a little bit of a washout as you go. So whether it's off the toes, it'd be washing out that way. Off the heels, you're washing out that way. Off the toes, not the biggest deal. It did make it look or feel like in my head like I was popping and trying to move to the side. Off the heels, it was the worst feeling ever. It's when you go to load and pop, and as soon as you do, your foot comes out in front of you, and you basically get straight leg off of both legs, and it was one of the most awkward feelings ever. And I hate it so much. It's almost like when you're first learning how to jump and you kind of just put everything into it and think straightening your legs is where you should be when you're in the air. Yeah, probably my least favorite thing about it. But so overall, honestly, it's a really good cruising board for just an average day. Like this winter, we didn't have a whole lot of days with park because we had a late start to the winter, had a few dumps later. One of the things that I never really saw the pro or necessarily the con in was powder riding. We didn't have a whole lot of days this year. It was either kind of 6 inches of no snow or 2 feet where I didn't end up riding this board. But in those cases, I kind of see where it would technically give you a little bit more surface area when you're turning, in that like your nose would be a little bit more flat, which should give you more lift, but it would be giving you more lift in both the nose and the tail, which I guess would be beneficial. I feel like on a pow board, you'd almost want it just more in the nose and less in the tail, to give you more lift up front. But I never really saw anything beneficial or detrimental in that. The only thing I thought of was that possibly with the angles, the fronts being kind of angled up, is that if you're going straight in pallet, and essentially it would kind of allow more sink because this wouldn't be pushing flat down on the snow, it would be kind of letting snow fall out the sides. So I think it has its pros and cons. Honestly, couldn't tell you because I don't know the physics behind everything. But yeah, overall in pallet kind of reacts like any other board. One of the biggest things to address with this board is the directional twin shape between the contact points here and here. Perfectly twin, feels the exact same riding, both regular and switch. So that portion feels great. As with most Bataleons, the nose on their directional twins is a centimeter longer, pretty much unnoticeable for basically everything you're doing. You're not gonna feel that swing weight like you would with like a War Pig or something like that, where it's twin but chopped off a whole bunch in the tail. This one, a little bit more drastic with the kind of mini swallowtailish, whatever you want to call this, cut out in the back. I think when I measured it out and did the math, if you made this an actual full twin, this would be more like a 167. But that puts it where this board is basically the Goliath with more flex in it. So even with this cut out, which I think it ends up being about 4 centimeters or so less in the tail cut off, don't really notice it. Swing weight, couldn't tell. I'm also not spinning anything crazy. So if you're spinning under a 10, you probably would have no idea. As you'll see now, there's a lot of pros that are riding directional twins and directional, just straight up directional boards in competitions spinning above 10s and 12s. I'm not going that fast, so I'm not gonna really notice the swing weight. The one thing that is fun is that riding switch, you do get to look down at this really blocked out tail, which you know is your tail compared to the way I've always been riding, which is twin boards that look the same both directions. This one's actually a little bit fun riding switch because it just looks kind of funny. So, but yeah, so this is my very overdue review of the Bataleon Whatever. This works for the 2022 as well as the 2023. If they don't change anything after that, it'll probably work the same for every board afterwards. Bataleon does a really good job of keeping stuff in their line the same, except for just shifting certain things, like maybe on like this Whatever, cutting out the tail a little bit. If you guys have any questions, leave a comment down below. I respond to every single one of them. If you guys like this video or found it helpful, hit the thumbs up because I guess it does help some algorithm of sharing this stuff out. But if you guys want to see more, subscribe because I've got a review of these Bataleon bindings, which were switchbacks, as well as some nitro bindings as well, and also some Solomon boots. So there's some more reviews coming up, and snow season's right on the corner, so we're gonna have some riding here hopefully pretty soon. So yeah, have a good one, guys. Peace.